I heard her on the phone in the living room. Her voice was low, sharp. No, Mom's fine. She's got her little retirement tucked away, and that's safe of hers. If I really know when, my daughter told me I needed to give up my bedroom so her children could have more space, I didn't argue. I simply moved my clothes into the small guest room and moved every dollar, every bond, and every piece of real jewelry out of the safe before she had the chance to touch them. Because real family doesn't strip you of your dignity, and once they try, you have to protect what's left. She thought she'd claimed the best room in the house. She thought the safe, my safe, was still heavy with the weight of my life's sacrifices. She had no idea it was already empty, and that my plan to take back control was already unfolding, step by step. What came next would not just change who owned what in this house, it would change who held the power. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed, and tell me where you're listening from. The smell of mesquite carried through the open kitchen window that morning, the kind of warm Texas breeze that always reminded me of simpler times. Times before the weight of bills, before the loneliness of widowhood, before every choice I made revolved around keeping my daughter's future safe. I was 32 when my husband died. A car accident on a rain-slick road just outside Lubbock. One minute we were laughing over dinner. The next, I was alone in a hospital hallway, listening to a doctor explain words I couldn't process. My daughter Emily was only 8. Her hair was still in pigtails back then, her backpack bigger than her shoulders. From that night on, there was no one else to lean on, no parents nearby, no brothers or sisters to share the load. Just me and her. The ranch-style house we lived in wasn't much, but it was ours. Every nail, every faded piece of siding, every creak in the floorboards had been bought with sweat and sacrifice. I swore I'd never let that roof slip from over her head, no matter what I had to give up. Those first years were hard. I took double shifts at the diner, coming home with my hands smelling of coffee and fryer oil. I cleaned houses on weekends, sometimes staying late to polish floors until my knees ached. Emily didn't see most of it. I wanted her to have the luxury of a childhood untouched by the constant worry of how we'd make it to the next month. When she turned 16, she asked if she could get a car. I laughed at first, a warm laugh, not a mean one, because I didn't know how I'd manage it. But I did. I sold my mother's wedding bracelet, the one she'd given me on my own wedding day. I told Emily it was just sitting in a drawer, and that it was better to trade it for something useful. She didn't ask what it was worth. She was too busy hugging me and holding the keys. That bracelet had been part of the small collection I kept in my safe. A heavy steel thing tucked into the back wall of my bedroom closet. It held pieces of my past, jewelry, old deeds, savings bonds, and the documents that proved the house was in my name. That safe wasn't just metal and lock. It was my silent witness. It had guarded everything I couldn't afford to lose. Years passed, and the safe's contents changed. A few more bonds, a little cash tucked away from each paycheck. Some photographs of Emily at her high school graduation, me standing beside her in a dress I bought second-hand. When Emily decided to go to college in Dallas, I wanted to make sure she didn't start her adult life in debt. I sold the pearl necklace my husband had given me on our 10th anniversary, the same one I had worn the day he proposed. That sale covered her first semester's tuition. She never knew, and I never told her. After college, Emily married a man named Mark. I'll admit, I wasn't sure about him. His smile never quite reached his eyes, and he spoke about money the way some people talk about the weather, as if it just happened to them, not something they were responsible for. Still, she seemed happy, and I told myself that was enough. But after 10 years it ended. Divorce papers came, and so did the phone call. She was moving back in just for a while. I said yes, without hesitation. The house felt too quiet anyway, and I thought having her home would be a blessing. It wasn't. The first weeks were fine. We shared coffee in the mornings, the scent of fresh brew mixing with the faint scent of cedar from the old cabinets. But soon her boxes started spilling into the hallway, then the dining room. She didn't seem to notice the way my movements narrowed, the way I pressed myself against walls to pass by without tripping over her things. When the divorce settlement money ran out, she stopped offering to help with groceries. I didn't bring it up. I thought maybe she just needed time to get back on her feet. One evening, she'd help. She has to, I'm her daughter. She laughed, then a short humorless sound, and I felt something in me shift. The safe, she was thinking about the safe. That night, I opened it and sat on the floor beside it for a long time. The cash was still there, stacked neatly in envelopes. The bonds were sealed in plastic sleeves. My wedding ring, now just a thin gold band with a stone too small to catch much light, lay in its box. I touched each thing slowly, memorizing the feel, the weight. I thought about every moment those items represented, the long hours, the aching feet, the goodbyes to things I loved so Emily could have more. And I realized something: sacrifice had always been my language of love. But maybe she had started to mistake it for weakness. The day she moved her children in, I didn't protest. I watched as she carried their toys and bedding into the master bedroom, my bedroom. The walls I had painted myself were now covered in stickers and crayon marks. The closet that had held my clothes for decades was stuffed with plastic bins. She smiled like it was progress, like it was natural. I moved into the guest room, smaller and darker, the air carrying a faint musty smell that no amount of open windows could fix. But I didn't complain. I said nothing about the safe, still sitting where it always had in the master closet. Because I already knew the day would come when she'd try to open it. And when she did, she'd learn something about her mother she had never understood before. The day it happened started quiet. I was standing at the stove, frying eggs, the smell of butter and salt filling the kitchen. Emily came in, her hair pulled up, holding her coffee like it was the only thing keeping her alive. She didn't sit down, she didn't even wait for me to speak. I've decided the kids are going to have the master bedroom. They need the space more than you. Not we've talked about it. Not would you mind. Decided, the pan hissed when I set it down too hard on the burner. I kept my eyes on the yolks, watching one of them split and run across the white. I didn't answer. The silence said everything. By that afternoon, the moving had begun. Boxes of toys and clothes were stacked in my hallway. The sound of dresser drawers scraping against my hardwood floors made my jaw ache from clenching. I walked into the doorway of my old room and stopped. The bed I had slept in for 30 years was pushed against the far wall. The quilt I'd sewn with my own hands was folded carelessly on the floor. The air smelled faintly of bubblegum and crayons now, not lavender and cedar. She was on her knees, prying open the closet door. Her voice was light, almost cheerful. I'll have to clear all this out. The kids don't need to be staring at old lady clutter. Old lady clutter. Those words landed heavier than I expected. In the corner, the safe sat exactly where it had always been, tucked deep in the closet, its metal surface catching the afternoon light. She looked at it and smirked. "We should probably move that out," she said. "Wouldn't want it to scare them." Scare them. It had never scared me. That's safe.
You go that way and you keep going straight and you come to it.
She ran her hand along the edge of the like she was testing the wood. Besides, if something
No, that's the new end.
No, what about the very
Oh, very, very.
there. It's just sitting. It's just sitting. Her words echoed in my head long after she left the room. That night, I heard her on the phone. Her voice was low but sharp enough to cut through the thin guest room walls. "No, I think she'll give it up, if I explain it's for the kids. I mean, she doesn't really need all that money now. She's just holding on to it." There was a pause. Then a laugh, short, confident. "If I play it right, she won't even notice it's gone until I've handled what I need to." I lay in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, my pulse steady but cold. It wasn't about space for the children. It wasn't even about the safe. It was about ownership. About control. The next morning, I passed her in the hallway. She smiled like nothing had happened. "You're settling into the guest room okay, right?" I nodded, but my mind was somewhere else. I thought about all the years I'd worked for the contents of that safe. About the nights I'd counted dollar bills under a single lamp, tucking them away like seeds for a season I might never see. I thought about the bracelet I'd sold, so she could have a car. The pearl necklace that paid for her first semester. The way I had opened that safe to give, every time she asked, and even when she didn't. And I realized something dangerous. She didn't see the safe as mine anymore. She saw it as hers, just waiting for the moment she decided to claim it. What she didn't know was that I had already started thinking about how to make sure, when that day came, she would open it and find nothing but the weight of her own assumptions. The first night after she mentioned the safe, I didn't sleep. I lay in the guest room staring at the ceiling fan as it clicked with each slow turn. The walls in here were thin, thin enough to hear footsteps, thin enough to hear whispers. And I could hear them. Her voice drifted down the hall again. She'll hand it over if I explain it's for the kids. She won't say no. A pause, then softer, almost smug. She's been sitting on it for years, she's not using it. I could make it work for all of us. All of us, no. This was for her. When the house was finally quiet, I got up. My feet sank into the cool carpet as I walked down the hall, each step measured. The master bedroom door was open. I could smell the faint sweetness of bubblegum and the plastic scent of new storage bins. In the closet, the safe sat exactly where it always had, steady, solid, silent. I turned the combination. The click of the lock was louder in the quiet than I remembered. One by one, I touched the contents. The envelopes of cash, still crisp and neatly stacked. The bonds sealed in their plastic. The thin gold band from my wedding, resting in its small velvet box. A stack of old photographs, my husband holding Emily as a baby, the three of us smiling under a wide Texas sky. I counted, twice, and I decided that night the safe would not be here when she came for it. The next day, I began quietly. In the early mornings, before the kids were up, I moved small things into a locked suitcase under my bed, first the cash, then the jewelry, then the documents. Each item wrapped in plain cloth, so if she saw the suitcase, it would look unremarkable. In their place, I left decoys. A handful of old newspapers, neatly folded to match the shape of the envelopes. Cheap costume jewelry, tangled in a box where my real pieces had been. From the outside, nothing looked different. 2 days later, I called an old friend. Harold had been a lawyer before he retired to a small farm outside of town. He still had a voice that could cut through a courtroom. I told him I needed advice, just in case. He didn't ask many questions, he didn't have to. We met for coffee in a diner, 30 miles from home. He leaned in, his voice low. You need a bank account in your name only, and you need to make sure your home is legally protected. If she's living there, she may try to claim rights. By the time I drove home, I had a new account, my valuables in the suitcase, and a plan forming in my mind. From that day on, I started keeping records. Every conversation we had, I wrote down. Dates, times, her exact words, especially anything about the safe or money. One afternoon, while passing the hallway, I caught my grandson, with his small fingers on the safe's handle, twisting it like a toy. He looked up, startled. Mama says there's treasure in here. Treasure. That night, I moved the suitcase into the trunk of my car, and parked it at Harold's farm. I left the decoy safe in place, heavy enough to feel full, silent enough to keep it secret. Over the next weeks, I overheard more. Emily on the phone, saying, once I get it open, things will be different. She thought she was the one planning, but what she didn't know was that every move she made was exactly the one I wanted her to. I knew it was coming. The way she hovered by my door, pretending to look for her phone. The way her eyes lingered, not on me, but on the safe in the corner of my room. One evening, she finally said it. Her voice was sweet, too sweet. Mom, I've been thinking, for security reasons, maybe we should keep the safe in my room. You know, just in case something happens to you. I smiled, just a small one. Because the thing about thieves is, they don't like to think you're already ahead of them. I nodded, almost too quickly. That makes sense, I said, letting the words hang in the air, like I'd surrendered something precious. But the truth, that safe had been nothing but a stage prop for weeks now. When she carried it into her new bedroom, she didn't know she was holding a hollow box, stuffed with yellowing newspapers, a few broken watches, and a string of costume pearls that smelled faintly of dust. It sat there, heavy with disappointment, and I waited. Days passed in silence. She didn't open it right away, she wanted the moment to be perfect. I could feel her greed growing like mold in the dark, hidden but spreading. Then one night, I heard it, the faint metallic click of the combination lock, the squeak of the hinges, and then, nothing, just silence so sharp, I could almost hear her heart drop. In the morning, her mood had changed, her words were clipped, her smile forced. But she didn't say anything, not yet. She was waiting for the right audience. That Sunday, the audience arrived. Relatives filled the dining room, their voices blending with the clink of cutlery and the smell of roasted lamb. The house felt warm, almost festive, until she stood up. Her chair scraped the floor, her face was flushed, and her hands shook as she pointed at me. "Where is it?" she demanded. The room went silent. I didn't move. "Where is what?" Her voice rose. "Don't play games with me, Mum. The safe is empty, all the cash, the jewelry, the papers, gone. Where did you put them?" Every eye in the room turned to me. I set down my fork, wiped my hands on the napkin, and looked her in the eye. "Things of value," I said softly, "belong where they are respected." Gasps rippled around the table. She stared at me, shaking with rage, but I didn't look away. Because in that moment, the real fight hadn't even started yet. And what I was about to reveal next would change everything. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't sit down. "You think you can talk to me like that in front of everyone?" she snapped. Her voice was trembling. Not from fear, but from humiliation. She hated losing control, especially with relatives watching. I didn't answer. The silence said everything. My brother cleared his throat, trying to cut the tension. "Maybe this isn't the time." But she cut him off. "No, this is the time. I've done everything for this family, and now she's hiding things from me. What does that say about trust?" Her words were sharp, meant to draw blood, but I didn't flinch. I took a sip of water, letting her frustration swell until it filled the room. Finally, I set the glass down. "You don't get to demand trust," I said quietly, "when you've treated mine like something disposable." She blinked, caught off guard by the calmness in my tone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Because while she was standing there, red-faced and shaking, my plan was already locked into place, on paper, in signatures, in legal files she couldn't touch. 2 weeks earlier, I had sat in a small law office, with beige walls and a single ticking clock. The attorney slid the papers toward me, explaining each clause. The house, my house, now belonged to a living trust. I was the primary resident, with full control, until the day I died. No one, not even my own daughter, could evict me, not without breaking the law. I'd signed my name in slow, deliberate strokes, each letter another layer of armor between me and her greed. Back at the table, she was still talking. Her words spilling into the silence, like oil on water. "I just don't understand why you'd do this to me. To your own daughter." That word, daughter, used like a weapon. As if blood alone entitled her everything I had worked for. I stood, my chair sliding back against the tile. The room held its breath. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt the last threads of guilt slip away. "What I did," I said evenly, "was make sure no one could take my home from me. Not while I'm alive. Not ever." She opened her mouth, but I kept going. "I put it in a trust. It's legally protected. So you can stop planning whatever you were planning, because it's over." Gasps again. A few murmurs. Her face went pale, then red. "You had no right." "I had every right." I cut in, my voice like steel. "This house was built on my sacrifices, and I will decide who respects it enough to keep it." Her eyes darted to the relatives. Her allies were suddenly quiet. The power had shifted, and she knew it. But what she didn't know was that this was only the beginning. The rest of dinner was nothing but the sound of forks scraping against plates. No one looked directly at her, and she didn't look at me, but I could feel it. The heat of her anger building, the wheels already turning. She wouldn't let this go quietly. She never did. 2 days later, I heard the slam of the front door. Heavy footsteps down the hallway. She appeared in my doorway, her phone in one hand, her voice sharp enough to cut. "You think you've won? You think some papers are going to stop me?" I didn't look up from the book I was reading. Not some papers, legally binding ones. She stepped inside, close enough for me to smell the perfume she always wore. Too sweet, too heavy. "That lawyer of yours. I already talked to someone who says those trusts can be broken. It's just a matter of time." I closed the book, marking the page with one finger. "You can try," I said, my tone almost gentle. "But every hour you spend fighting me is another hour you're not building a life of your own." She scoffed, turning to leave. But I wasn't done. "You should also know," I called after her, "that my will has been updated. If you keep pushing, you'll find there's nothing left for you in it." She froze in the doorway, the fight drained from her shoulders, replaced by something she'd never admit to: fear. I let the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. Then I added, "You still have time to choose a different path, but the door to this one is closed." Her footsteps retreated, slower this time. The front door clicked shut. A few moments later, I exhaled, leaning back in my chair. The house felt different now, lighter, not because the battle was over, but because I had finally taken back control. Later that week, I stood in the garden, pruning roses, while the afternoon sun warmed my shoulders. The legal documents were locked away in a fireproof box, the keys hidden where only I could reach them. Every petal I trimmed away felt like a small release, cutting off what no longer served the plant. It wasn't just gardening, it was a reminder that you can't let the wrong hands hold the things you've nurtured. And though she didn't know it yet, I had one last step planned, one that would make sure my dignity and my home stayed untouched long after I was gone. The last step was the quietest. No shouting, no slammed doors, just a meeting in a small office with a lawyer who understood the value of silence. We went over everything again: the living trust, my residency rights, the clauses that made it airtight. Then I added one more document to the stack, a sealed letter. It wasn't for me, it was for after. Inside, I had written the truth of what happened: every insult, every manipulation, every theft of trust, names, dates, details, all of it, and instructions for it to be read aloud to the entire family the day my will was executed. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about history, making sure the real story didn't get buried under her version. When the lawyer slid the papers into the file and locked it away, I felt something shift inside me, like closing the cover on a book I'd been forced to read too many times. Back home, I walked through the house slowly. My house, my footsteps echoed against the hardwood floors, each one a quiet reminder that every wall, every window, every inch of this space was still mine, not because she allowed it, but because I claimed it. That night, I made tea and sat by the window. The safe still sat in her room, a hollow shell of what she thought it was. She hadn't moved it. Maybe she couldn't face it. I could have gloated. I could have reminded her that she'd been outplayed, but there was no need. The silence between us spoke louder than any words. As the steam curled from my cup, I thought of the phrase my own mother once told me, one I hadn't understood until now. "You don't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes you just have to outlast." And I had. I'd outlasted her schemes, her greed, her need to control. And now, the house, my dignity, and my story were safe, not just for today, but for as long as my name was on those papers, and beyond. They say betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from your own blood, but what they don't tell you is that it doesn't end with the cut. It lingers. It seeps into every quiet moment, until even the sound of their voice feels like a bruise you can't protect. That afternoon, the house was too full. I could feel it before I even stepped into the living room. The air was thick, the kind of thick that holds whispers, the kind that smells faintly of tension, no one's willing to name out loud. From the hallway, I caught the scent of lamb roasting too long in the oven, mixed with the cloying sweetness of overbrewed chai. Cups clinked against saucers, voices murmured in uneven waves, and underneath it all, there was her voice, clear, purposeful, carrying just enough to make sure every ear caught it. I walked in, and the first thing I noticed wasn't her words, it was her stance, center of the room, back straight, arms crossed like a shield she thought would protect her, my daughter, my own flesh and blood. She didn't greet me, she didn't even meet my eyes, she just kept talking, she emptied it, she was saying, her voice laced with practiced hurt. Everything my father worked for, everything we were supposed to share, she took it, for herself. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably on the couch, some didn't look at me at all, others did, their gazes sharp, almost hungry. I could hear the question in their silence, could it be true? I didn't interrupt, not yet. I let her speak, let her spin her story, because I'd learned something in the last few months. Sometimes the most powerful way to dismantle a lie is to let the liar build it high enough to collapse under its own weight. She went on about how I'd changed, how I was keeping secrets from my own family. Her words were deliberate, each one placed like a stone meant to crush. I felt my heart beating slow and heavy, but my hands were steady, because I'd come prepared, not for her attack. I hadn't known she would do this here, today, in front of them, but for the day she'd force me to show the truth. The folder was in my bag, the dark leather worn from years of use. It was heavier than it looked, not from the weight of paper, but from the weight of proof. When she finally stopped, it wasn't because she'd run out of words, it was because the silence in the room had shifted. People were looking at me now, waiting, expecting either a defense or a confession. I stood, the chair legs scraped softly against the rug. I placed the folder on the coffee table, the sound of it hitting the wood small but sharp. I didn't rush, I didn't need to. The first sheet I pulled out was a bank statement from 5 years ago. Her name, my payments, clear as day, electric bills, water bills, school fees. I laid it on the table, then another, mortgage installments, all mine, receipts for groceries I'd bought when her fridge was empty, car repair payments I'd made without asking for a single rupee back, paper after paper, year after year, a quiet history she'd conveniently forgotten. I looked at her then, just for a moment. She avoided my gaze. Next came the trust documents, notarized, stamped, my lawyer's seal still crisp in the corner. The house was in my name, in my trust, with clear instructions that it would never be transferred without my consent. It wasn't hers to claim, not now, not ever. I could feel the weight of the room pressing in. Chairs creaked as people leaned forward to see. The only sound was the soft rustle of paper as I turned each page. Then I spoke. Yes, I emptied the safe, because trust once broken cannot be left unguarded. I told them how I'd paid her debts quietly, without judgment, until I realized my help had turned into her entitlement. I told them how she had taken without giving, demanded without earning, and treated my home like it was already hers to divide. Her lips trembled, but she forced her chin up. It's still family money, she said, voice shaking, but loud enough to carry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Real family respects you. Real family.
Oh, so you just go literally go that
down
way
in the street.
and you keep going straight
Yeah,
and you come to
you
it.
come to it, yeah.
And
Yeah.
I couldn't tell, but her eyes glistened.
That's very
She looked
lovely.
Yeah.
around the room, but
No, that's the new one.
No, what about the very
Oh, very, very.
John was gone. Her hand shot out, grabbing her children's. She moved toward the door, her steps quick, uneven. The slam of the door echoed through the house, and then, nothing, just the low hum of whispered judgments. And for the first time in months, none of them were about me. I stood there, the folder still open in front of me, breathing in the heavy silence she'd left behind. But what I did next, she never saw coming. The house was finally quiet again, not the heavy, suffocating silence from before, the kind that made my chest tighten, but a stillness that felt clean, like a room after the dust has been swept out, when you can breathe without tasting the grit. For weeks, I had avoided stepping into that bedroom, her bedroom. The door had stayed shut, not from fear, but from the need to let the air settle. And when I finally opened it, The first thing that struck me wasn't the emptiness, it was the light, golden, warm, spilling across the bare carpet in long rectangles. The curtains had been pulled back, the same floral ones I had sewn by hand years ago, and for the first time in months, the room smelled like linen and sunlight, not perfume and resentment. I didn't rush. I walked the perimeter, fingertips grazing the walls, remembering every argument, every slammed door, every night I'd heard her voice raised against me in my own home. I let the memories rise, and then, one by one, I let them go. The next morning, I began the transformation, not for her. For me, shelves went up first, solid oak, heavy, the kind meant to hold more than books. A long table by the window, perfect for my sewing machine and the soft whir I'd missed. I stacked novels I'd been saving for years, their spines still uncracked, and jars of buttons and thread that caught the morning light, like tiny jewels. It became a library, a craft room, a space that gave back, instead of taking. The phone rang now and then, her number flashing across the screen. Sometimes I answered, sometimes I didn't. When I did, the conversation was short, civil. I saw the grandchildren when I chose to, not when I was summoned. We baked cookies, planted flowers, played cards at the kitchen table. But when the clock reached the time I'd set, they went home. Boundaries were no longer a discussion, they were a fact. One afternoon, I stood in the corner of my new room, staring at the old safe. It looked out of place now, cold, metallic, a relic of another life. I had emptied it months ago, but just seeing it there reminded me of everything I'd had to protect, everything she'd tried to take. So I sold it. In its place, I put a cedar chest, not for money, not for documents. Inside, I placed a quilt my grandmother had made, a photo album with pages yellowing at the edges, a locket with a curl of hair from my son when he was born. No key, no combination. The only lock now was me, because trust once broken isn't rebuilt with words. It's guarded by choice. And my choice was simple. My home, my heart, my dignity, were no longer open to just anyone. As the sun dipped low, filling the room with that same golden light, I sat in my chair with a book in my lap. No noise, no demands, no weight that wasn't mine to carry. For the first time in years, peace wasn't something I hoped for, it was something I owned. They say blood is thicker than water, but I've learned, it's also the perfect excuse some people use to bleed you dry. Real family respects you, not just your money. I've given years, sacrifices, and second chances to people who should have protected me as much as I protected them. And I know I'm not the only one. Some of you listening right now, you've been used, you've been silenced, you've been told to be the bigger person, while they kept taking more. You don't owe your dignity to anyone, not even to the people who share your last name. If this story has touched you, if it's made you remember moments you've tried to forget, I want to hear from you. Share your own story in the comments, your story of betrayal, of standing up, of taking your life back. Because when we speak, we remind others they're not alone. And if you want more real stories, more moments of truth, more proof that quiet strength is the most dangerous kind, make sure you're subscribed, turn on notifications, and let's keep this conversation alive. The world needs to hear us, and your story might just be the one that saves someone else.